Welcome to the ANEW Insight Podcast, empowering and inspiring your journey to optimal health. Hosted by Dr. Supatra Tovar, clinical psychologist, registered dietitian, fitness expert, and author of Deprogram Diet Culture. Rethink your relationship with food, heal your mind, and live a diet-free life. I follow my guests' journey to optimal health, providing you with the keys to unlock your own wellness path. Tune in and evolve with us. Hello and welcome to the ANEW Insight Podcast. I am Dr. Supatra Tovar, and I am so excited to have progress coach, podcaster, and self-proclaimed recovering perfectionist Monica Packer with us today. Monica, thank you so much for joining us.
Well, I'm very happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
Wonderful. I am going to read a little bit about Monica, and then we're going to get right into our questions. Monica Packer is a progress coach, podcaster, and self-proclaimed recovering perfectionist who has dedicated her life to helping women break free from the shackles of perfectionism. Through her platform About Progress, Monica inspires others to embrace the mantra progress, not perfection. We all need to hear this as they pursue personal growth and self-development. Her very popular podcast, also called About Progress, which I was on recently and just was so thrilled to have her interview me, reaches thousands of listeners worldwide, featuring heartfelt conversations and actionable insights about building habits, overcoming self-doubt, and fostering self-acceptance. Monica has also created impactful tools like the Do Something list and the Sticky Habit method, which guide individuals towards sustainable, meaningful progress in their lives. She is a mother, a mentor, and a motivational speaker who believes that every woman deserves to feel capable and worthy, no matter her circumstances. Monica's mission is simple yet profound: to help women learn to embrace imperfection and unlock their full potential. And I'm going to add on, I think she's one of the kindest, most empathetic people that I've met in a very long time. Monica, welcome.
Thank you. Wow, that was such a glowing bio. I was like, wow, I didn't write that, but that was very nice. Thank you.
Oh, absolutely. I think you're very inspiring. And I think there's so many listeners out there that really need to understand that perfectionism and being perfect is not a requirement, I think, especially for women. But I really want to know about your journey. I think that you've inspired a lot of people. And I just want to know what experiences led you to do this kind of work. I'm assuming you are, like you said, you're a recovering perfectionist, but I think I'd love to give our listeners a picture of what that actually looked like for you.
Mm-hmm. Well, without recounting a memoir size history here, I'll just share about two big phases of my life that showed me I needed to find a new way to progress and to develop the things that mattered to me in my life. And the first happened when I was about 20 years old. And at that point, I was the stereotypical overachieving perfectionist, getting straight A's in college, doing all the extracurricular, being super on top of everything from health to my spirituality. And on the outside, I'm sure I was something that many people would think just had it all together. And while I could project that on the insides, I was paying the price that perfectionism entailed, which for me really hit the wall of mental health for me, eating disorders and multiples of them. And with that, depression and anxiety and panic attacks and suicidal ideation. And there were quite a series of moments with those that helped me see I needed help. And I'm really glad that my college happened to have that free counseling center, because that's where I went. At that point, I was a mentor for freshman students. I had sent many students there, and it was just one of those weird moments to, walk in that door myself and take it and do the intake form and be welcomed right in. That started what became a few necessary years of deep healing. But because I was trying to heal from those eating disorders, I really went to the other side of perfectionism, which is the underachieving kind. And that was to, try to protect myself from the pain, the great pain, and many years of work that recovering from that pain required of me. I thought it was safer to not try because in my mind there was only one model and it was all or nothing. I would tend to my responsibilities, but for myself there was no push to grow, to strive, to be better. And again, it just came back to the all or nothing model. And then that's when I hit another wall when I was approaching my 30th birthday. And now this year I'm turning 39. So I expect another
Mm.
thing to happen this year or next year. But as I was approaching that birthday, I realized that I was still a perfectionist. And that actually came about because of a new therapist I had. Because just like I did when I was 20, I similarly was very depressed and anxious and dealing with panic attacks. Um, and it was confusing because I'm like, why? Because I'm doing nothing with my life. And she pointed out that I was a perfectionist. And I realized that the source was true. And we can talk more about that, like the source of putting my identity on my outcomes. And it was preventing me from trying. So I knew in that moment, and it was mostly thanks to how I was showing up in my relationships, meaning not as myself, that I had to change. And not that I had to be someone different, I had to be myself. And the way back to myself entailed a lot of discovery and a lot of weird things I didn't count on, like habit development and picking up goals again and other areas of my life that I had long put on the back burner, but doing so in a way that prioritized messy progress over that all or nothing perfectionism. And like I said, it's been now 9 years later, and I have changed dramatically. And I'm myself, really. But that experiment of progress over perfection um, has amounted to exponential growth in ways I didn't
Wow.
experience before on any part of that spectrum of perfectionism. And that's why I'm here.
Wow. That's a long road, and I think a lot of lessons along the way. And I think of particular interest, not that the entire journey has is not of interest to me. I think that perfectionism really does present itself in the way of eating disorders for so many young women.
Yeah.
And if you could speak a little bit more to that, what
Mhm.
did you feel like you needed to do in order to be perfect at that age? How did your eating disorders present themselves?
Finally getting to the point where my disordered eating turned into eating disorders, that was a long road in of itself. I mean, those patterns started at a very young age, starting around 10. And I will say everything began with good intentions. I didn't set out to be someone with an eating disorder. I set out to be a good person. And I was just
Mm,
trying to follow the rules that were taught, quite directly in health class, like putting down, writing a food diary. I don't think that's necessarily bad advice, but things like that eventually turned into more and more of those strict behaviors. And I was also a dancer. I was lucky to be in a ballet studio where they didn't criticize our weight publicly or weigh us or
wow.
anything. That I know that's pretty rare, but it just goes to show that so much of this is through osmosis. I never had
Mhm,
someone tell me directly that you have to look a certain way to be this kind of dancer, nor did I have someone tell me, good women look this way. But it was very much a part of my family, a part of my culture, a part of my religion as well, that, women, to get your value, it was often on what people could see, not just the
mhm,
physical appearance, but that was a big part of it, but more about what you can achieve and do with your goodness. So it was all with good intentions. It just gradually grew from like, eliminating food groups to thinking I could only eat a certain amount of items a day to eliminating sugar for years at a time. And,
mhm,
it gradually took on bigger behaviors, which for me gradually became binge eating disorder, which when I was
mhm,
first diagnosed was like new. like
mhm.
it was new to me. And I was
Mhm.
so blessed, honestly, to have a therapist who validated that I had an eating disorder
Yes,
because it wasn't due to lack of control. It was a biological response to my years of patterns of starving myself. I basically was a failed anorexic.
yes.
And because of that, I hid it. And, my roommates didn't know, my best friends didn't know, my family didn't know, my husband didn't know. He didn't even know until a few years into our marriage what my eating disorder was. He knew I had had one and I was working on it still, but he didn't know what type because it just was so shame driven for me to have that
Absolutely.
particular one. So, I mean, that's a little bit more of the history. And you're clearly a therapist because you're just such a good listener, and I'm sitting here talking. So I apologize if that was longer than it
That's the
needed to
whole
be.
point.
You're good at what you do.
The whole point is for you to be talking. Absolutely. And I think that so many people can relate to this. And that's what I often see in my practice is that binging, it doesn't have like just this unknown cause. It's usually coming from restriction. And I think, it's centered in control at first. And then because the control is so difficult to maintain, then and because there's all or nothing thinking, you go straight to the other side. And so,
Yes.
shame and guilt are, always accompanying those behaviors. So I would assume, the reason why people didn't know is because most people binge eat in secret. They hide
Yeah.
it. They, will throw away the wrappers, or they'll go out someplace so that they can eat so that other people don't see them. And it is a very, very difficult disorder to overcome. And so, what do
Yes.
you think for you was the pathway toward recovery? What helped you the most?
Well, I told you I had a therapist validate that it was an eating disorder. That honestly was foundational to my recovery. Um,
Mhm.
and as part of that validation, he said something weird to me that I think a lot of people would find maybe depressing, but for me, it was not. Um, because I was probably like 3 months into my recovery and things were getting worse, which was
Mm.
very confusing, especially for someone who had been so type A about like, if you want this outcome, you do these things. And then when you do them, you get that outcome. And it wasn't the case with my eating disorder. It was only getting worse. And I felt like
Mhm.
my life was falling apart in ways that were starting to become visible, to others.
Mhm.
And so I was telling him about how things were going and how distressing it was for me. And he looked at me and he said, Monica, you will likely deal with this the rest of your life. And again, that may sound really depressing, but for me, it was like, oh, I don't have to fix this overnight. I can't.
Mhm.
It's not down
Mhm.
to just sheer willpower and grit. I can't, push my way through this. It's going to take time. And that's
Mhm.
really the gift he gave me. He gave me the gift of time. It took a
Mhm.
long time. It took me many years. In fact, there were years where I was convinced I wasn't getting better.
Mhm.
And I can see now I can see like that those behaviors were not totally controlling my life, but because like I would still have them, it felt like they were just like, why aren't they gone? But now I can say, I think I'm about 18 years almost into my recovery. I don't
Mhm.
have those problems anymore.
Mhm.
And it's so weird because, what helped me is to know I'd probably deal with it the rest of my life, and I don't. It just took a great
Yes.
deal of time and compassion coupled with persistence to slowly, ever so slowly, make healing happen.
And I think you mentioned it being about all or nothing thinking often when we
Yeah,
deal with perfectionism. And I think what that therapist gave you was the middle ground.
yeah,
He told you didn't have to be perfect about your recovery,
mhm,
that it is a process, and it is about, incremental steps towards healing. And I think a lot of people who struggle with perfectionism thinks that it has to just, oh, okay, now I know I have a problem, so I have to solve it. And
yeah,
that's the same type of thinking that got them into perfectionism. So that was an incredible gift. Now you said like there was a period of time where everything was kind of messy, but
mm,
then you realized you were still a perfectionist.
yeah,
Give a picture of that, because I think that's a kind of a newer concept to people,
mhm,
that even if your life doesn't look like it, you may still be practicing perfectionism and be
mhm.
called a perfectionist, even if the life looks messy.
So most perfectionists I know are actually the quote unquote underachieving kind. And
Mhm.
just like, the binge eating disorder for me began initially from a place of control, of hyper control. I find that the underachieving perfectionists also had big periods of going after the all or nothing part of perfectionism, of really being high achieving and hardworking and burning out, of not being able to sustain what they were doing, or paying a price they didn't intend to pay. Um, and then falling into that, what seems like a safe side of nothing, to just not try anymore,
Mhm.
to not put in the effort because of fear. Uh, and now it's like the fear is stopping you before you even start. And of course, there's a
Mm.
spectrum to that. And sometimes people just bounce back and forth, they're somewhere in between, or they get lost in that indecision because they're just fighting those dual sides in themselves because they've been bouncing around so much. It really affects the way you see yourself. So when I realized I was still a perfectionist, again, thanks to that and another amazing therapist, you guys just all changed the world. Um, I just, like I said, was on the sidelines. I've always been, since I was a little girl, I've always been someone who is more determined and wants to grow. That's just always been a part of me, but ambitious too. And that was a part that was totally gone. There were things I'd
Mm.
always wanted to try or do, even just as simple as writing a blog, because everybody was writing a blog in those 2010s, period, especially the early 2010s, and just thinking, oh, I can't because nobody will read it, or oh, I won't be very good at it, or considering that I wanted to go into interior design, but I thought, well, that won't be practical, or I won't be able to get clients, things like that. I'm just on the sidelines for everything. Um, but when we talk about perfectionism, I'm sure you will have a more like a more official definition about, it's a coping mechanism, it's a behavioral thing, it's also a mindset thing. But for me, the root of perfectionism is a misplacement of identity. It's where we
Mhm.
misplace who we are on our outcomes, whether we have them or we don't. So at that
Mhm.
point, when I didn't have them, that was very reflective of my identity, that I was a
Mhm.
failure, that I couldn't
Mhm.
try, that it was for other people to do big things, not for me, that wasn't possible
Mhm.
for me because I didn't fit that mold anymore. I'm
Mhm.
sure many women can relate to that. I've had women totally break down when they're like, wait, I'm not lazy. I'm just a perfectionist.
I do think, if we kind of venture into therapy land, that perfectionism is is a form of a trauma response.
Yes. Yes.
You look at like fight or flight, that's what most people think is their, kind of
Hmm.
lack of safety response, but there's also freezing, which was this period of time for you.
Yeah.
And then in terms of perfection, that's really fawning. And we're trying to make our environment safe.
Mm,
That I think is so important for people to realize that it's not, just societal pressure or just like, what women face. I think so often it's about trying to make sure that our environment is safe enough for us to feel comfortable. And
mhm,
and that pursuit becomes never ending because there is no such thing as perfect. And so you're always striving and never achieving rather than just being, comfortable and satisfied where you are. I think that that's, at the core of it. So then when your therapist, basically you were like a frozen
yeah,
perfectionist,
mhm.
what snapped you out of it?
Well, I think it was just me going on a run, honestly, where I could actually think, and I was just mulling over her words like, "You're a perfectionist. You're a perfectionist." I'm just like, I don't know if that's true." But then as I was running and I was thinking, I was realizing, yeah, I can see it now. I can see it. I can see how
Mm.
my behaviors were really pushed by this response to my life and to what I've been through and how I thought I was supposed to be, and the disappointments and the failures along the way. And as I turned the corner to the street to our home, I just had this thought, just needs to be about progress. Like I just need to try to do things and be mediocre at them. Like I just should do that. And and then I had the idea to start a blog, and I initially was going to call it Mediocre Monica because that's what I wanted. I wanted to be mediocre. I wanted to have the courage to be bad at things. or to mess up at them or them to not be successful right away. But I decided to call it about progress instead and document things. And the thing is, like, and nobody did read that blog. It wasn't a success. Like it didn't create the outcomes that I would have hoped. But what it did do is instill this weird sort of confidence in me.
Mm.
And that all start, that's part of my do something list that you mentioned at the very front in my bio. That's what I try to do. I made a list of 30 things I wanted to try before I turned 30. Now we call that the do something list in my community. And the whole point was trying. It was about exploration, not completion. And on that, one of the things was start the blog finally. And other things included go to a museum because I almost went into museum studies. I did an internship at the Smithsonian DC. I
Mm.
hadn't been to a museum since, just stuff like
Wow.
that. Make a new kind of oatmeal was on the list. Like anything counted. This is where your listeners may not be able to see, but this painting over here is one of those things for my do something list. Like my husband came home to me like,
They'll see it.
painting, it's not good. It's there to remind me just how it felt to be okay with not being good at something. And because that was the point, that confidence grew in me. And I think more than the confidence, it was that sense of myself was returning again. And I
Mm.
was able to form a new relationship with failure. I was able to form a new relationship with myself too.
Wow. And they will be able to see this because we're
Oh, great.
recording the video as
Okay.
well.
Yeah,
So
great. That's good.
gorgeous painting. And I think that is so inspiring, and it had to have inspired others because you now have like a community that you correspond with. Tell us how you built that, how that grew.
Well, funnily enough, it all came from the do something list. Getting into this mode of it's about progress, not perfection, and that courage and that sense of self it was earning me. One of the things I like to tell women is there's a trickle down effect when you do the do something list. Other things start to happen in your life that you didn't intend, but are really good for you, such as me getting back into habits, which I had no plan on doing. But one of the things
Mhm.
was start a podcast. So about, I think 9 months in to this experiment. So I now turned 30. I just had this thought while we were driving back from San Diego. We lived in Northern California at the time. One of our kids had unfortunately gotten sick on our vacation. So we had to drive all the way back just that single day. And as we were driving, I had a lot of time on my hands and I was just thinking. And I turned to my husband and I was like, I think I'm going to start a podcast. He was like, okay. So I Googled like how to start a podcast. And again, it wasn't because I was like, I'm going after something big and these are my goals. Here are the steps I'm going to get there, even though I totally do that now in many areas of my life. It was more about why not try? Because it's okay for me to be bad at this. Like I get to be bad at this. It's about progress. So I get to be bad. And that's how the podcast started. And what do you know? It's now been 8.5 years almost later, and I'm still doing it. And that's another thing that's changed my life too. Didn't have it on my list to begin with. So there's going to be trickle down effects to challenging these perfectionistic tendencies of leaning into the mess of leaning into the courage it requires to take small steps and to persist in those small steps, believing that big change will happen because it will, and so will the trickle down effect.
How did you keep going? Even if, maybe listenership was small in the beginning, how
Yeah.
did you stay motivated?
I really think it goes back to some naivete. Never know how to
Mhm.
say that word. Definitely that, but also I had been so encouraged by what it felt like to do things again. That's why
Mm.
it's called the do something list. It wasn't all, it wasn't nothing, it
Mhm.
was something. And just how
Mhm.
good it felt to be doing something in my life instead of just thinking about it or being jealous of other people doing it.
Yes.
To finally be doing it
Mhm.
alone for many years was the fuel I needed to keep going. But
Mm.
also, along the way, just I interviewed a lot of people in the beginning. It was mostly a stories podcast. I mostly
Mhm.
interviewed other people about their own story of learning about progress over perfection. We ended up talking a ton about mental health, which is no surprise now, but again, then it wasn't really a big open topic. But
Mhm.
hearing people's stories just really helped me see I wasn't alone in mine. And it helped me see the purpose to my pain. And then I was able to also use my other skill sets of teaching, which I was a good teacher and I love teaching, and learning. I love learning as well. And being able to use those skill sets in new and different ways. It's also been a big challenge for me. Actually, last year was my make it or break it year for my podcast. Now 8 years in, at
Mm.
that point, I was like, listen, guys, the this is not working in terms of helping pay for my kids' speech therapy, which they all seem to need. So it's either going to work or it's not. I'm going to have to move on. That was a tough year. But one thing
Wow.
that helped me persist is I gave myself a deadline to stop. I gave
Mhm.
myself a deadline. And because I had a deadline to stop, I didn't quit.
Wow.
And it also gave me the freedom I needed to explore other options because I did. And I still have those options
Mhm.
right now. Now, when the deadline came, it luckily it did feel like, okay, we can continue. Like I can pay for those speech therapy sessions.
Yay.
Hooray. But it's still a long road, but I've turned that corner and there's had already been many dips in the road. So I knew that too. Like, hey, there's always dips in everything you pursue. It's just like things aren't working or you have to pivot or it feels really defeating or like nobody cares. And that's any pursuit, right? But
Mhm.
having that deadline helped me actually get through that better. And it also helped me be like, yeah, it's not the end of the world.
Oh
Everybody
my
has to
gosh.
change. Everybody has to change tracks. So and that still
So
may be in the
inspiring.
future. Yeah, it still may be in my future. One of the things I'm considering is becoming a therapist. So who knows?
Oh, I think you'd be
Maybe I'll be
so
Dr.
good at
Monica
that.
at some point. But for now, I
Yes.
can stick with the podcast.
Oh, it's so inspiring. I mean, it's the basic message, and we're out of time for this half of the podcast, but I really want to sum it up is, you know, we are all under these pressures to be
Hmm.
perfect.
Hmm.
Societal pressures, especially, also internal pressures, familial pressures. But we really need to learn that there is this middle ground. And when we can exist in the middle ground, we actually can give us much more grace, much more space to be able to explore. And that's what you started to do. And I want to come back and talk about this do something list so we can really
Okay.
map that out for listeners. And that's what resulted in your podcast. You also gave yourself time and space plus a deadline, and that helps you to explore within
Yeah.
that time without the pressure of a never ending pursuit that maybe will not go anywhere. So it's totally inspiring, and you would make an incredible therapist, by the way.
Oh,
You're
thanks.
so yeah, just you're so warm, and I mean, I think everyone feels so comfortable around you. But
That's very
we're going to
kind.
get back into this a little bit more in the next half. Thank you so much for joining us. Tune in next time for the second half of this amazing interview with progress coach, podcaster, and self-proclaimed recovering perfectionist, Monica Packer. Thank you, Monica.
Thank you.
Thanks for tuning into the ANEW Insight Podcast. Please remember the contents shared on this podcast is for entertainment purposes only and does not constitute medical advice. You can find us anywhere podcasts are streaming, on YouTube at my.anew.insight and at anew-insight.com under the ANEW Insight Podcast tab. And follow us on our socials at my.anew.insight on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, and Threads for more updates. Tune in next time and evolve with us.